Hello and welcome to screencast number 7 for chapter 18, and we're going to talk about those rising sea levels and the types of effect that they can have on people. So the runoff from the melting glaciers and the ice that is coming off of Iceland and the Antarctic sheets and Arctic sheets are going to cause the sea levels to rise. And what happens is as the temperatures increase in the water, that expands. And we know that from any time that we have frozen water and we've boiled water, it expands. It expands in volume. This is known as thermal expansion. And thermal expansion is one of the primary causes right now that we're seeing current sea levels rise. And we mentioned this in the last screencast that significantly they've risen from about 1.8 millimeters per year to about 3.4 millimeters per year. So this has caused the sea levels to rise, which leads to beach erosion. It leads to coastal flooding. We're seeing the intrusion of salt water into our aquifers, and we're seeing greater impact from storm surges. And a storm surge, as you're probably familiar with, is just a temporary localized rise in sea level from high tides and winds and storms, which can come into coastal towns and cities and flood out stores and homes. So taking a look at this particular graphic, this represents the global average sea level, which has risen over 200 millimeters. That's 7.9 inches since 1870. And the data from tide gauges and the satellite observations confirm this continued trend. The thermal expansion of water also accounts for the sea level rise. So we're seeing that the dark line represents our tide gauge data that we've collected throughout the years. The red is what we can see in the satellite data, and then the gray area is that margin of error, that statistical uncertainty. So it could fluctuate higher or it could fluctuate a little bit lower. But we're seeing that most of the rise is from our thermal expansion. About 28% comes from our glaciers and ice caps, and then 15% from the melting ice sheets. So the higher the sea level is going to allow the storm surges to push further inland, and that's going to mean more damage. In 2004, there was an earthquake that created a tsunami, which we know is a tidal wave, that killed about 100 Maldives residents and caused about $470 million in damage. Again, an extreme weather event. In 2012, we had Hurricane Sandy that we talked about, $60 billion in damage, killed 130 people. It left thousands homeless across the United States and the East Coast. Hurricane Katrina in 2025, that killed over 1,800 people, and it did about $80 billion of damage. There were higher sea levels and warmer oceans and loss of coastal wetlands that made this damage a lot worse. So here we can see the results of some of these storms. Here's Jersey City, where we can see flooding of taxi cabs. Look at how deep that water was. We can look in with the edge of Brooklyn and the Rockaways and look at these houses. They've just literally been washed off of their foundations. And then Queens, look at the experience, what they had here, all from Hurricane Sandy. So 53% of the people in the United States live in the coastal areas or have homes because they vacation there, and they are at risk from storms and rising water. I heard a prediction saying that Pennsylvania will be the new coastal area because of the rising waters. I don't know how true that is, but that's one of the predictions. Different coastal areas are experiencing different amounts of sea level rise in some of the areas. In 2007, there was an assessment report that was done by the IPCC, and it predicted that mean sea level would rise from 7 to 23 inches higher by the end of the 21st century, and it depended on our level of emissions. There's new research that looks at Greenland's ice, and it's melting at an accelerating rate. And if polar melting continues, the sea levels will rise more quickly. This is going to possibly impact that ocean conveyor belt because it changes the chemistry of the water, the salinity of the water, which changes the way that that water can be heated and cooled. In 2009, a European research team used a different approach to estimate future sea level rise. They examined the rates at which it has risen and fallen in the past, and they forecast that the rise will be about 0.9 to 1.3 meters by the year 2100. And some researchers are using a figure of 1 meter rise to assess the risk. Jeremy Weiss from the University of Arizona and his colleagues have pointed out that 3.9 million Americans live within 1 vertical meter of the high tide line, and they're estimated that a 1 meter rise will threaten 180 U.S. cities by losing an average of 9% of their land. This includes areas of Miami and Tampa and New Orleans, Virginia Beach. Those are some of the areas that were at the most risk. The sea levels this century have rise about 18 centimeters or 1 meter. Hundreds of millions of people will be displaced or will need to invest in costly efforts to protect against high tides and storm surges, raising their houses up on platforms. Densely populated regions and low-lying river deltas, like in Bangladesh, would be the most affected. So would storm-prone regions of Florida and coastal cities such as Houston and Charleston, and areas where land is subsiding, such as the Gulf Coast. These would all need to be evacuated. Tuvalu and Maldives fear their very existence. In the meantime, island nations such as Maldives, got to stop here for a minute. Sorry for that interruption. Dodger was about ready to cross the keypad and I didn't want him to touch anything. But we're looking at Maldives' fear for their existence. Maldives is likely to suffer shortages of fresh water as rising sea levels bring salt water into their aquifers. The contamination of underground water and soils by seawater also threatens areas such as Tampa, which depend on small lenses of fresh water and flow to top saline water. So some big changes that they are predicting. Taking a look at this graphic, the sea level is rising at different rates along the stretches of the United States. Rates are highest where the land is subsiding. It's most vulnerable to future damage, like the Gulf Coast and the central Atlantic seaboard. So the darker the area, the higher the levels are increasing. So right down here in Louisiana, we're seeing the most increase. And look at along our own coastal seaboard here, we're seeing increases as well. Florida, when we're thinking about Tampa and Miami, this is a projected region that would be flooded if we had a 1 meter rise in sea level. If you've ever been to any of these areas, this would all be underwater. And potentially, if it continues, all of this would be underwater as well. So think of all the homes and the farmland and the different things that would be impacted. Our coral reefs. We know that the coral reefs are very significant marine ecosystems. They are critical for economy. They provide habitat for important fish that are consumed locally and exported. Uh, Recreational as far as snorkeling and scuba diving, so they're big for tourism. They reduce the wave intensity and they protect the coastlines from erosion. And around the world, rising seas are eating away at the coral reefs. We're losing mangrove forests and our salt marshes, and all of these serve as barriers in protecting our coasts. Climate changes pose two additional threats to the coral reefs. One, the warmer waters contribute to coral bleaching, and that's what kills the corals. The second is an increased concentration of carbon dioxide that is coming from the atmosphere that alters the ocean chemistry. It is the leading cause of ocean acidification, where it's causing the levels to acid levels to go up. We know that organisms build their exoskeletons from the carbon dioxide and from calcium, and when the pH is not at the right level, then they can't build their exoskeletons from the calcium, and this is what's going to be changing the coral reefs. The oceans have already decreased by 0.1 in pH per unit, and they are predicted to decline almost up to 0.35 more units in pH. And this could easily be enough to destroy most of our planet's living coral reefs. The destruction could be catastrophic for marine biodiversity and fisheries, so many organisms depend on those living coral reefs. In other areas, organisms are adapted to their environments, and they are affected when those environmental changes happen. Think of like lizards and salamanders and iguanas that require the warmer, moist, humid temperatures. And with those temperature changes in the areas, they're not going to be able to survive. Global warming modifies temperatures-dependent phenomenon. Plant leaves that would normally come out later on are coming out earlier in the spring. Look at the warm trend that we had in February, and we saw buds and blossoms on some of our trees in February. That means insects are going to emerge earlier, and birds that migrate, that rely on those insects, they might not have food availability, and it's going to cause them to migrate earlier. Thinking of robins, robins we usually don't see into March, and we were seeing robins in February. This changes and causes mismatches for the organisms so that they lack food for the young birds since the insects had emerged earlier. Animals and plants will move towards the poles and upward in elevation toward cooler areas. So we had seen an influx of Canadian geese because it was warmer here and they had less predators. Now they'll be moving back up towards the poles again, which might be a good thing. 20 to 30% of the species that we have will be threatened to extinction. Trees may not be able to shift their distributions fast enough to match the climate. We're going to see rare species will be pushed out of preserves, and animals and plants adapted to mountainous environments will be forced uphill until there's no place for them to go. We're going to see droughts and fire and disease with plants increase. We're going to see fewer plants, which means more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere if we continue at this rate. Increased precipitation can lead to increased flooding and erosion of polluting aquatic habitats, carrying disease as well, while droughts might cause rivers and ponds to shrink. So here's birds that are moving northward that they haven't seen in this region before because of the warming temperatures. And pikas are going to be forced, aren't they cute, are going to be forced to move more up into the mountainous areas. Okay, let's end this screencast and we'll continue in the next one. Bye.